This month on Property Tribes, we're inviting you to get into the property groove for 2017. And joining me now is Upad CEO James Davis, who is also a landlord. And James, I thought it'd be really great to speak to you about this. And what do you think are the key areas that landlords can focus on and look to improve upon in 2017?
So I think the key thing for me is when a landlord, me included, lets a property, it's very easy to think you've signed that tenancy agreement, file it away, and everything just happens for the next 12 months. I think the idea of being passive in the landlord world really doesn't work for you. I think you only realise this once you've had a bad tenant and the journey you have to go through, cost and effort to make amends, that you realise actually this isn't great. So the idea of being an active person within the space is really, really important. And what I mean by that is you can't just rely on the tenancy agreement. You know, that's there as the backup if everything falls apart. But prior to that, to have an active role within your portfolio is really, really important. A few things I would mention. The first is that when you've just let a place, maybe a few days before the first rent payment is due, send a text, email or whatever to your tenants just to remind them that it's due in a few days' time. Maybe for the next two, send one the day before and then leave it. But just to get them in the groove, as you call it, I think that would be a worthwhile thing to do.
Excellent.
Make sure you're not putting your head in the sand. I think it's so easy for us, and it's probably a British culture, to try and put our head in the sand and ignore there's a situation arising. So whilst we're talking about rent payments, if the rent is due today, for example, make sure you contact your tenants today, whether it's a text or an email, or call them, and just go, you know, in a friendly, informal way, "Hi, your rent's due today, just want to make sure everything is okay." Don't be forceful, like a bailiff tone, and don't wait 2 or 3 weeks before you address the problem. Nip it in the bud rather than it becoming a bigger thing. And 9 times out of 10, they may have just forgotten, they may be just transferring it the next day or whatever it may be. But a nice gentle prompt and being informal, I think, really works. You know, the formal bit is the agreement that you have in place. I think it's also really important to do inspections of your property. It was actually quite interesting because we did a webinar last week, and there was a lot of comments from landlords saying, I thought it was illegal to do more than 4 inspections per year. I'm concerned about causing harassment. And I think just for the avoidance of doubt, if you're going around there every day to make sure they've wiped the kitchen surface down, that's harassment. But doing an inspection quarterly or monthly or bi-monthly is fine, and it's fair and reasonable. And I think what is really useful to pick up on, and especially at this time of year when we're clearly not opening up windows because it's freezing cold outside, you're more likely to have condensation at this time of year. You know, heating's on max, windows are closed more often, we've got a growth of open plan living in terms of kitchens and pots and pans boiling. That moisture, and from drying clothes inside and the bathroom, needs to go somewhere. And if we're increasingly not opening those windows, it's going to cause condensation, which then causes black mould, and actually is just unsightly rather than actually causing real damage to the property. But by going around there every other month and just advising them about things like that, not putting oil down the kitchen sink, making sure they're cleaning the filter out on the washing machine, just those things. There is a role to play for landlords to educate their tenants on how to look after their home. It is not a hotel room, it is a home, and I think people need educating about how to do these sort of checks, same with boiler pressure, just to keep an eye on it. And doing those sort of things, I think, is really important. And I think for the year ahead, we should be focusing on those things to have an active role, because actually, the more you're helping your tenants and educating them about how to look after it, the less likely you are to have to use your tenancy agreement, go through recovering deposit monies, your property's going to be in better nick, etc., etc. So I think all landlords in the UK should be focused on being proactive for the rest of this year, and I think it's a lot better than drinking less or smoking less and whatever, and far more fun. So hopefully that makes sense.
It certainly does, and I agree 100%. I think that's really fantastic advice. Just to finish, James, just carrying on the kind of theme of good tenant communication, should landlords be contactable you know, up to say 10 o'clock at night. I hear of landlords that have a separate mobile phone and they switch it off on the dot of 5 o'clock. Yeah. What's your view on being available to tenants? And obviously it's vital to be able to report repair issues at this time of year, such as, you know, a boiler that's broken or they've got no heating or this kind of thing. What's your view?
So, to be contacted at midnight to say I've locked myself out, but I had a really good fun evening, is not acceptable. That's not your responsibility. And again, there's this educational role landlords need to play about who's responsible for what. If there is a leak or there's a fire or something like that, I want to know about it straight away. Whether it's a separate phone, it's WhatsApp or whatever, my tenants, for some reason, choose every means of communication available rather than just one, but that's fine. It doesn't. I'm not concerned by that. But I think you should make yourself available when there's an issue to do with repairs. The one thing that does frustrate me, and I think it's fair and reasonable, is when tenants call me outside of normal 9 to 5 office hours just to do with stuff like maybe the smoke alarm is beeping. You know, that's unreasonable, and I think we need to educate our tenants that, can you try and call me during office hours if it's something like that? If it's an emergency, or you know, there's no hot water, for example, and it might just need the boiler being reset, that is different as far as I'm concerned. But it is a 24-hour thing, and I think it's fair and reasonable for somebody to contact you on the weekend if there's no hot water pressure, for example. But I think landlords need to take responsibility themselves and educate their tenants on where that line is, about when you can contact them at midnight, not just because they can't find the keys on their way home after going to the pub.
No, I agree totally with that as well, actually. And of course, a happy tenant's going to stay longer, which is what we all ultimately want. James mentioned there about mould and condensation in rental properties, and on Property Tribes we actually do have a guide for tenants about that landlords can hand out to their tenants, so I'll pop a link for that below this video. And thanks very much for joining me again.
No worries, thanks Vanessa.